Okay, so we're going to look at slope and graphing lines. So again, I know I say this every time, but make sure you print out those notes and read through them, and then you can fill in the examples as we go along. All right, so we have two ways to graph a line. First way is we're going to graph using the intercepts, okay, and a checkpoint, and then we'll talk about graphing using the slope. That's the much better way to graph. All right, so graphing using the intercepts. All right, an intercept, all right, is where your graph crosses the x or y axis. Remember, this one is the x-axis and this one is the y-axis. Okay, so what you're going to do is when they cross those axes, they'll cross at 0. So to find x, all right, so if I want to find x, what I do is I plug in a 0 for y. Okay, remember, in an ordered pair, the x comes first and then the y. Okay, so to find x, what you're going to do is stick in that 0 for y. So let's do that. 2x plus 4 times 0 equals 8. So when you plug in that 0, that's going to cancel out and go away. So 2x equals 8, and then you divide it by 2, x is 4. So there's that ordered pair 4, 0. Okay, now to find the y, we start back over. Okay, to find the y-intercept, what you're going to do is take the x this time and make it 0. So you're going to put a 0 in for the x and see what y is. Alright, so if we do that, then this cancels out and I'm just left with 4y equals 8. And if I divide by 4, then y equals 2. Now, truly, that's all you need to do. You don't really need to do the checkpoint, okay? But if you were required to, which I'm not going to require you to, what you can do is pick any number you want to and plug it in for x. The easiest one to do is 1 and see what y is, but I wouldn't worry with this step too much. Okay, so let's do the checkpoint. What we're going to do is plug in a 1 for x and see what y is. And you just kind of want to make sure they're all falling in line. Okay, so if I subtract the 2, then 4y equals 6, and if I divide by 4, y equals, reduce it to 3 over 2. Okay, well that's kind of hard to plot, so let's change it. Let's see, how many times does 2 go into 3? One time with 1 left over, so 1.5 or 1.5. And now we can plot all those 3 points. Okay, so let's plot 4, 0, which would be right here, 0, 2, right here. We want to make sure, we could just connect the dots from right there, but let's make sure our checkpoint falls in line. So we're going to plot 1, 1.5, and that does fall in line. And now I can connect the dots. Okay, so to find the x-intercept, put a 0 in for y. Okay, to find the y-intercept, put a 0 in for x, and then checkpoint, you get to choose your number you want to for x and so on for y. Okay, now a much better way is to graph using the slope and the y-intercept. So let's talk about slope. Slope is a measure of the steepness of the line. Okay, you need 2 ordered pairs to find slope, and then there's your formula. Okay, so on the next 2 examples, I just said find the slope. So I gave you your 2 ordered pairs. What you want to do is label them. Call them, this one's x1, y1, and this one is x2, y2, and then this is a simple plug and chug formula. Slope is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So let's plug in. Y2 is a negative 3 minus y1 is 0. X2 is a negative 2 minus x1, which is another negative 2. So I end up with negative 3 over, that changes to negative 2 plus 2. What do you get? 0. Your number 1 rule in math is you cannot divide by 0. So can you do this? So you're just going to say undefined or no slope, which we'll talk about in a minute. Okay, let's do this one, which actually does have an answer. So again, label them x1, y1, and x2, y2. So write your formula down each time. The more you write it, the more it sticks in your head. Okay, m is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Make sure that you memorize that formula. I do not give it to you. Alright, so let's plug it in. Y2 is negative 13 minus Y1, which is a negative 1. X2 is 2 minus X1, which is a negative 6. So I end up with negative 13 plus 1, or negative 12. And on the bottom, 2 plus 6, which would be 8. And then we can reduce that to, what goes into both of them, 4, 3 halves. Okay. So that's how you find slope. You'll do a lot more with slope in college algebra. Okay. Alright, now the easiest way is to graph a line is to solve it for y. Okay, graphing using the slope and the y-intercept. So you want to make sure when you graph these lines that you solve for y first. So I gave you some notes on your paper. Make sure you read through them, but let's do the examples. Okay, so look at both of these, 4 and 5. On both of them is the y by itself. Yes, so these are the easy kind. So when the y is by itself, you're going to end up with two numbers. The number in front of x is your slope, and the constant is your y-intercept. Okay, now make sure you write it as a y-intercept. Okay, it's telling you y is 1, and we learned just a minute ago in a y-intercept the x would have been 0. Okay, this is where you always start. You always start with the y-intercept, so we'll plot 0, 1. Okay, now slope is our 2/3. Slope is like climbing stairs. Okay, you're always going to go up the top number, and then if it's a positive slope like this one, you go right the bottom. Okay, if it's negative, you would go left the bottom. So put your pencil back on your dot at 0, 1. From there, you're going to go up 2, and then you're going to go to the right 3. And make your next dot, showing them up with a straight line. Okay. Alright, so let's do this one. Number in front of x is my slope, so it's negative 3 halves. Alright, so this one's negative. And then the constant out there at the end is negative 2. So that's my y-intercept. It's negative 2, and so the x had to be 0. So then that's where I start. So everybody go plot 0, negative 2. Okay. Now again, slope is climbing stairs, so again, I'm not going to worry about that negative yet. Okay, you always go up the top number. Okay, but if the slope is negative, then what you're going to do is go toward the negative x's when you go over. So this time I'm going to go up and left since it's negative. So put your pencil back on your negative 2. You're going to go up 3 and over 2 to the left. Okay. If you have a positive slope, you want your line to point to the right to the positive x's. If you have a negative slope, your line's going to point to the left to the negative x's. Okay. Alright, so let's do two more. Now the problem with these two, 6 and 7, is the y by itself. No. So the first thing we have to do is get the y by itself. Alright, so what I need to do is pick up this 4x and move it across the equal mark. Well, what happens to that when you move it across? The sign would change. So I get a negative 4x plus a 1. Alright, so the x is by itself, so here's my slope. My slope is negative 4. If you don't want to write like that, remember you can always write it as over 1. Alright, and then my y-intercept is that constant, which is 1, and I fill in my 0. Alright, so let's start at 0, 1. Okay. Okay, so again, I always go up the top number, so now I'm going up 4, and since it's negative, I'm going to go to the left 1. So go up 4 and over 1 to the left. Okay. Alright, so same thing with this one. 3x minus 2y equals negative 4. You got to do some work and get that y by itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is move that across. So I would get a negative 2y equals a negative 3x minus 4. And then divide everybody by negative 2. So I end up with y equals, alright, the negatives cancel, so I get 3 over 2x, and negative 4 divided by negative 2 is positive 2. So my slope is 3 over 2. My y-intercept is 0, 2. Okay, so let's start at 0, 2. Alright, I'm going up 3, and since it's positive, I'm going to go this time to the right 2. So up 3, over 2 to the right. Okay, 2 points is all it takes. Alright, we have final, at the end, two special cases, vertical and horizontal lines. You can recognize those because vertical lines just have an X, there's no Y, and horizontal lines just have a Y, there's no X. Okay, so when you see this, okay, when you see just an X, that is a vertical line. So you would go to where X is -3 and cut it with a vertical line. Okay, these are just straight, flat out. Memorize them, and memorize that vertical lines have no slope, or that undefined slope like we looked at a minute ago. Alright, the problem with this one is the y is not by itself, but if I divided both sides by 3, y is what? 4. So when you don't have an x, when you just have y, these are horizontal, so you go to where y is 4, and you cut it with a horizontal line. These have slope equal to 0. Okay, and a lot of people remember that a y is horizontal because if you flipped it upside down, you get a h, and you can remember y and horizontal go together. So if that helps you, great. All right, go try your homework.